The child's voice whispered through the headphones at exactly 3:17 in the morning, while the black box lay open on the examination table. Marcus Reed's body went rigid. His fingers, which had been typing the transcription report just seconds before, froze over the keyboard. Then, without warning, he collapsed to the floor. The three other engineers in the adjacent room found him 17 minutes later, completely paralyzed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, mouth locked in a silent scream. Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe now. This channel exposes aviation mysteries and forbidden reports the industry tries to hide. Documents like these are continuously being classified or deleted from official records. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation that they don't want you to see. Dr. Elena Vazquez had been investigating crashed aircraft black boxes for 23 years. Her reputation at the National Transportation Safety Board was impeccable, methodical, skeptical, and strictly scientific. In all my career, I've never encountered anything like the Oceanic Air 473 case, she admitted during our private interview, her hands visibly shaking as she sipped her coffee. What happened to Marcus was just the beginning. The investigation began routinely enough. Oceanic Air Flight 473, a Boeing 737 MAX with 176 souls on board, had disappeared from radar on March 12, 2023, approximately 4 hours into its journey from Singapore to Los Angeles. The aircraft had been cruising at 38,000 feet over the northern Pacific when it simply vanished. No distress call, no deviation from course, no adverse weather conditions, just complete radio silence. For 17 days, search teams combed an 800-square-mile area of ocean. The floating debris they eventually found was minimal. A few seat cushions, fragments of the tail section, and one partially intact life vest. But on the 18th day, something unexpected was discovered. The flight data recorder, or black box, had washed up on a small uninhabited island nearly 300 miles from the projected crash site. The location made absolutely no sense, explained Captain Robert Thompson, who led the recovery team. Ocean currents don't move in that direction. It's as if someone, or something, deliberately placed it there for us to find. Even more puzzling was the condition of the recorder itself. Black boxes are designed to withstand extreme impacts, temperatures up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and depths of 20,000 feet underwater. Yet the device recovered from Flight 473 showed no signs of damage whatsoever. Not a dent, not a scratch. The bright orange casing looked as pristine as if it had just come from the factory. "I thought it was a mistake at first," Dr. Vazquez recalled. "I assumed they'd somehow recovered a new unit by accident, but the serial number matched Flight 473's records perfectly. Protocol dictated that the box be brought to the NTSB's laboratory in Washington, D.C., where specialized technicians could analyze its contents. This was where Marcus Reed, a 34-year-old audio engineer with 8 years of experience in aviation forensics, entered the picture. Marcus was one of our best," said Dr. Vazquez. "Steady hands, exceptional hearing, unflappable demeanor. The kind of person who thrived on precision and never seemed disturbed by the sometimes harrowing final moments captured on these devices." Reed began working on the black box at 9:45 p.m. on April 2nd. The late-night analysis wasn't unusual. The lab often operated round the clock during major investigations, and Reed had volunteered for the night shift. 3 other technicians were present in the facility, though they were working in a separate room on unrelated projects. According to the security footage, which I've personally reviewed, Reed's behavior showed no signs of distress during the first 5 hours of his shift. He methodically photographed the recorder, documented its condition, and connected it to the specialized equipment designed to extract and clean up audio from cockpit voice recorders. He took his usual coffee break at midnight, exchanged a few casual words with a colleague, and returned to his station. At 1:23 a.m., something changed. The security camera showed Reed suddenly sitting upright, adjusting his headphones, and leaning closer to his monitor. His body language suggested confusion. He rewound and replayed a section of audio multiple times, occasionally removing his headphones to rub his eyes or shake his head as if trying to clear his thoughts. The timestamp on the footage shows Reed making a phone call at 1:47 a.m. Phone records confirm he called Dr. Vasquez, who was at home sleeping. He sounded confused, not frightened, Dr. Vasquez told me. He said there was an anomaly in the recording, something he couldn't explain. He wanted a second opinion, but didn't want to disturb the others for what might be nothing. I told him to send me the file and that I'd check it in the morning. Reed never sent that file. Instead, he continued working alone. The footage shows him becoming increasingly agitated between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. He paced the room, repeatedly checked the equipment, and at one point appeared to be arguing with himself. At 2:53 a.m., he returned to his station, put on his headphones, and resumed his analysis. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Reed's body went rigid. The camera captured him staring into his monitor, completely motionless, for approximately 20 seconds. Then, without warning, he collapsed to the floor, knocking over his chair in the process. No one heard him fall. The other technicians, working in a soundproofed room down the hall, only discovered Reed when one of them came to use the coffee machine at 3:34 a.m. By then, Reed had been lying on the floor for 17 minutes. "I found him staring at the ceiling," said technician James Chen. "At first, I thought he was dead. His eyes were open, but he wasn't blinking. When I touched his shoulder, his skin was ice cold, but I could feel a pulse. That's when I realized he couldn't move at all. He was completely paralyzed." Reed was rushed to Georgetown University Hospital, where doctors were baffled by his condition. MRIs showed normal brain activity. There was no sign of stroke, seizure, or any physical trauma that could explain the sudden onset paralysis. Blood tests revealed no toxins or drugs in his system. Yet Reed remained completely immobile, able to move only his eyes. It was as if his entire nervous system had been locked down by some unknown mechanism, explained neurologist Dr. Sarah Patel. "We've seen cases of locked-in syndrome before, but they don't present this way, and they certainly don't happen in an instant without clear physiological cause." For 72 hours, Reed remained in this state, conscious but completely unable to move or communicate. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the paralysis lifted. Reed could move again. He could speak. But what he had to say would send shockwaves through the entire investigation team. "It wasn't mechanical failure," were reportedly his first words upon regaining speech. "They don't want us to know what really happened to that plane." When asked who they were, Reed became agitated and refused to elaborate. He claimed to have no memory of what he'd heard on the recording or what had caused his paralysis. But the medical staff and Dr. Vasquez noted a profound change in his demeanor. The once methodical, rational engineer now appeared deeply frightened. He refused to return to work and submitted his resignation from his hospital bed. But this strange incident was only the beginning of the mystery. With Reed unable or unwilling to continue the analysis, Dr. Vasquez assigned another engineer, Diane Foster, to examine the black box. Taking extra precautions, Foster was instructed to work only during daylight hours and never alone. "We had no reason to believe the recording itself had caused Marcus's condition," Dr. Vasquez explained. "But in 23 years of aviation investigation, I've learned to be cautious about unexplained events." Foster began her analysis on April 6th. She approached the task with appropriate skepticism, assuming Reed had simply succumbed to exhaustion or had some unknown medical episode. The first few hours of the cockpit voice recording were entirely normal. Routine communications between the pilots and air traffic control, standard checklist procedures, and the mundane conversations typical during long-haul flights. Then, Foster reached the 4-hour mark of the flight, the approximate time when contact with Flight 473 had been lost. What she heard defied explanation. The recording captured the captain and first officer discussing a weather system they were monitoring on radar, Foster reported. Their voices were calm, professional. Then there was a sound, something like static but with an unusual pattern to it. After that, silence. Not the silence of a recording failure, but the deliberate silence of two people who have stopped speaking. This silence lasted for approximately 40 seconds. Then, according to Foster's report, the captain said simply, "Do you see that?" The first officer didn't respond verbally, but the sound of rapid breathing could be heard. Then the captain's voice again, this time with unmistakable alarm. "What is that? That's not possible." More silence followed, broken only by what Foster described as unusual sounds from the aircraft, not alarms or warning systems, but creaking and groaning noises that aviation experts later concluded were inconsistent with any known mechanical issue or extreme weather event. Then came the moment that would change the course of the investigation entirely. A child's voice, clear and distinct, could be heard on the recording. The voice said, "We've been waiting for you," Foster reported. What made this particularly disturbing was that the passenger manifest for Flight 473 showed no children on board. The youngest passenger was 19 years old. Immediately after this voice, the recording captured the sound of both pilots reacting with confusion and alarm. The captain can be heard rapidly communicating with the first officer, their voices overlapping in a way that suggested growing panic. Several banging sounds followed, then what Foster described as a high-pitched tone that fluctuated in ways that seemed almost deliberate, like it was forming patterns. This tone continued for approximately 7 minutes. During this time, the pilots can occasionally be heard trying to use the radio, but their transmissions appear to receive no response. The captain can be heard saying, "Nothing's working," and "I've never seen instruments behave this way." At the 11-minute mark, after the child's voice was first heard, the recording captured a series of metallic sounds that experts identified as likely coming from the cockpit door. The captain can be heard saying, "Who's there?" "Return to your seat immediately." More silence followed. Then the child's voice returned, this time seemingly much closer to the cockpit microphone. "You can't turn around now. We're already here." Immediately after this statement, multiple alarms began sounding in the cockpit, suggesting sudden system failures across the aircraft. The pilots can be heard trying to respond to these alarms, their voices now showing clear signs of distress. The last intelligible words on the recording came from the first officer. "What are they? How did they get in?" The recording ended abruptly at that point. Foster completed her initial analysis and immediately reported her findings to Dr. Vasquez. Together, they listened to the final sections again. "I'm a scientist," Dr. Vasquez told me. "I don't believe in the supernatural or conspiracy theories. But what we heard on that recording," she paused, visibly uncomfortable. "It defied rational explanation." The two women agreed to bring in additional experts, sound engineers, linguistics specialists, and aviation systems analysts, to examine the recording. A team of 7 professionals gathered the next morning to begin a comprehensive analysis. But when they attempted to access the audio file Foster had saved the previous day, they found it corrupted. When they tried to extract the data directly from the black box again, the device failed to power on. Despite being fully functional just hours earlier, the recorder now appeared completely dead. Equipment failures happen, Dr. Vasquez acknowledged, but the timing was extremely suspicious. The team decided to open the black box to examine its internal components. What they found inside contradicted everything we know about these devices. Standard flight data recorders contain memory boards, a power supply, and various circuits housed in a virtually indestructible casing. But when the team opened Flight 473's recorder, they found the interior largely empty. Where the memory modules should have been, there was instead a small metallic object approximately 3 inches in length. It looked almost like a child's toy, described electronics specialist Thomas Wong. A small metallic cylinder with unusual markings etched into its surface. Nothing like any component I've ever seen in 20 years of working with aircraft systems. Wong photographed the object from multiple angles before attempting to remove it for further analysis. But when he touched the cylinder with a pair of insulated tweezers, witnesses report that it emitted a high-pitched sound, similar to the tone described in the cockpit recording, and began to vibrate. What happened next has been partially redacted from official reports, but through interviews with 3 people who were present, I've pieced together the sequence of events. The metallic object allegedly grew warm, then hot, enough that Wong dropped the tweezers. The high-pitched sound intensified to the point that several people covered their ears. Then, according to all 3 witnesses, the lights in the laboratory flickered, and all electronic equipment in the room, computers, phones, even battery-powered devices, simultaneously lost power. In the darkness, the metallic cylinder reportedly began to glow with a pale blue light. And that's when they heard it. The same child's voice that had been captured on the recording, now seemingly emanating directly from the object itself. "It's too late to turn back," the voice reportedly said. "They're already here." The emergency lights activated seconds later, bathing the laboratory in dim red light. The metallic object had disappeared. Not one of the 7 people in that room could account for what had happened to it. An immediate search of the laboratory found no trace of the cylinder. Review of the security cameras revealed something even more disturbing. A 17-minute gap in the footage, beginning precisely when Wong first touched the object with the tweezers. Within 24 hours, the investigation was officially taken over by a joint task force that included representatives from the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. The NTSB team was debriefed, required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements, and effectively removed from the case. "They told us it was a matter of national security," Dr. Vasquez said. "That our findings were preliminary and likely the result of equipment contamination or failure. But privately, several team members remained convinced that what they had witnessed was neither equipment failure nor contamination. Whatever was in that black box wasn't from the original aircraft," Foster told me in a conversation she later denied ever took place. And whatever happened to Flight 473 wasn't a conventional crash. In the months following these events, unusual patterns emerged. 3 of the 7 people present when the metallic object disappeared reported experiencing similar symptoms to those that had affected Marcus Reed. Episodes of temporary paralysis, particularly at night. 2 others described recurring nightmares featuring the child's voice. Wong, who had directly handled the tweezers that touched the object, developed unexplained neurological symptoms and took extended medical leave. As for the passengers and crew of Oceanic Air 473, the official investigation concluded that the aircraft had suffered catastrophic structural failure over the Pacific Ocean. The lack of recovered debris was attributed to the remote location and ocean currents. The families were compensated, memorials were held, and the case was officially closed. But questions remain. If the aircraft experienced catastrophic structural failure, why was there no distress call? How did the black box end up 300 miles from the projected crash site, completely undamaged? What was the metallic object found inside it? And perhaps most disturbing of all, whose voice was captured on the recording, claiming they were already here. I spent 6 months tracking down Marcus Reed, who had left Washington, D.C. shortly after his release from the hospital. I eventually found him living in a small town in rural Montana, deliberately off the grid, using a different name. He refused to speak about the incident on record, but during an unrecorded conversation over coffee, he said something that continues to haunt me. "What if we've been thinking about this all wrong?" he asked. "What if it wasn't a crash at all? What if Flight 473 actually reached its destination?" When I asked him to clarify what he meant, he looked around nervously, lowered his voice, and said, "Not everything that flies is an aircraft, and not everything that returns is human." He refused to elaborate further and asked me to leave immediately afterward. 3 weeks after our meeting, his small cabin burned to the ground. Local authorities found no remains, and Reed was officially declared missing. In the course of my investigation, I discovered 13 other incidents spanning the past 30 years that shared disturbing similarities with the Oceanic Air 473 case. Commercial flights that disappeared with minimal debris recovered. Black boxes found in unexpected locations. And in 7 of these cases, cockpit voice recordings that captured unexplained voices or sounds in the final moments before contact was lost. Most disturbing of all, in 5 of these incidents, the recordings reportedly captured a child's voice saying variations of the same phrase, "We've been waiting for you." The airline industry and transportation authorities dismiss these connections as coincidental or the product of conspiracy thinking. Official reports attribute each incident to conventional causes, mechanical failure, human error, or extreme weather events. But for those who have heard the voice, who have experienced its effects firsthand, conventional explanations ring hollow. Dr. Vasquez, who has since taken early retirement from the NTSB, offered this final thought during our last interview. "In aviation investigation, we rely on evidence, physical evidence. But what happens when the evidence itself defies the laws of physics? When the very tools we use to understand disasters become part of a larger mystery." She paused, glancing nervously at her hands, which hadn't stopped trembling since she first listened to that recording. "Whatever happened to that plane, whatever spoke through that black box, I don't believe it was anything we have the framework to understand, and I don't believe it's over." Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this entire case comes from an anonymous source within air traffic control. This individual, who requested complete anonymity, claims that on 3 separate occasions since the disappearance of Flight 473, radar systems have briefly detected aircraft squawking the exact same transponder code as the missing flight. Each time, the signal appeared for less than 30 seconds before vanishing. Each time, when other aircraft were directed to the coordinates, they reported finding nothing but empty sky. And each time, according to my source, air traffic controllers reported hearing a brief burst of static through their headphones, followed by what sounded like a child's laughter. The black boxes from all 13 incidents I've identified have one other thing in common. They have all mysteriously disappeared from evidence storage facilities. Official records list them as misplaced or transferred to classified research facilities. Not one remains available for independent analysis. As recently as last month, a commercial pilot flying over the northern Pacific reported seeing unusual lights that appeared to be following his aircraft. In his official report, he described the lights as pale blue, similar to St. Elmo's fire, but moving with deliberate patterns. When he radioed to ask if other aircraft were in the vicinity, air traffic control confirmed he was alone in that sector. The pilot then reported hearing unusual static through his headset, followed by what he described as a voice that shouldn't have been there. The transmission was lost for approximately 3 minutes. When communication was re-established, the pilot made no further mention of the lights or the voice, and later claimed to have no memory of reporting anything unusual. That pilot was flying the exact same route as Oceanic Air Flight 473. Whatever happened to Flight 473 and the other similar incidents remains officially unexplained. The metallic object found in the black box has never been identified. The source of the child's voice has never been determined. And Marcus Reed, the engineer who first heard that voice and became paralyzed, remains missing. For those who work in aviation safety, particularly those who analyze black boxes, a new unofficial protocol has emerged. If you hear a child's voice on a recording from an aircraft that had no children on board, remove your headphones immediately. Don't listen to what it says. Don't acknowledge what you've heard. And whatever you do, don't try to respond. Because sometimes, as Reed discovered, hearing is enough to establish contact. And once contact is established, it may already be too late to turn back. What would you do if you heard an unexplained child's voice through your headphones while analyzing crash data? Do you believe these incidents could be connected to something beyond conventional aircraft failures, or is there a more rational explanation we're missing? Share your theories in the comments below and subscribe for more investigations into aviation mysteries that the authorities don't want you to know about.